to this computer, just so that we've got a bit of a record of this.
Yeah, no problem.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, kia ora koto. Hi, everybody. No otatahi toku kainga inai nei. E roia toku tunga mahi o Parry Field Lawyers. Ko Stephen Mo toku ingoa. No reira ngā mihi kia koto katoa. Yeah, my name's Stephen Mo, and I'll just briefly outline who I am so that you know the context, like, why is this person here? And the first thing that you hear when I open my mouth is an accent. So just to briefly explain that, I actually moved to, are you ready for this? Otago in 1984. So my father is a marine biologist, and he was brought into New Zealand in 1984. So I was only 7 years old, and he was working on the Waitaki River in a place called Papakayo. So it's quite a small little blink and you miss it place, but I started school there at Standard 3. And, you know, back in Standard 3 and 4, the class was in one room. You know, it was that type of a little rural country town. And then eventually we, as a family, loved New Zealand, so stayed and moved to Otatahi to Christchurch in 1989. So I went to a school there that you may have heard of called Middleton Grange School. So that's like a Christian school, integrated school now. And then I went to Canterbury University, and I studied at Canterbury and did my law degree there. And I started my career in a law firm in Wellington called Russell McVeigh, which is one of the biggest New Zealand law firms. I'm a Christian and met my wife in church in Wellington, and we thought, let's go to London for 1 year. And that 1 year became 11 years. So I was based in London for 3 years at a law firm that had 8,000 employees. So this is much bigger than New Zealand scale, doing lots of cross-border mergers and acquisitions and things. Then we moved to Tokyo, and I was in Tokyo for 4 years. And then after Tokyo, I moved to Sydney and was in Sydney for 4 years. I've got young children, and they came home singing the Australian national anthem. So we knew it was time to make some decisions about where are we basing ourselves. So that was about 9 years ago, and we arrived back in Christchurch, decided to settle in the city that I'd grown up in because I kind of knew it, and I like Christchurch. It's a nice place. And as I was deciding where I should work, I thought I could go to one of the big New Zealand law firms, or I could go to this firm called Parry Field Lawyers. So Mr. Parry and Mr. Field were real people, but they passed away. It's been going for more than 75 years, but they've been gone now for decades. But the unique thing about them is that they were both strong Christians. So they were involved in the Brethren tradition. So they were lay preachers. They would go around and, you know, feed the people of the different churches. So the firm has grown up with a mindset of serving the wider church. So we have 85 people now and 11 partners, and all of the partners are Christians. So it means that our mindset and our approach is a little bit different to other law firms, we think. And it also means that we act for many, many churches across the whole country. So we're able to bring a lens of our faith, helping us to understand what's the drivers, what is this group wanting to do. So it sets us apart a little bit. And then the connection point with the Anglican Church in particular is that one of my partners is named Alex Summerly, and he's the Vice Chancellor of the Anglican Diocese.
Down here a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. So he's an amazing guy, very, very intelligent. He's in more of the disputes area. So he goes to court basically and helps people get the result that they want. But he's obviously, as the Vice Chancellor of the Canterbury or Christchurch Diocese, he's very involved in all of their many arms. So we end up our firm does a lot of work for that diocese, which means that we have a real understanding of how things operate and work. And Andrew, I think we maybe met at the Diocesan Registrar Conference.
I'll come across you at the Christian Savings Conference.
Christian Savings, yeah. So that's just a little bit of the background. So when I came back 9 years ago, I refocused my practice to be on impact and purpose. which means that half of my clients are pretty much charities, and the other half are often companies, but they're what I call for-purpose companies. So they're about more than profit. So it might be a social housing company, or it might be a retirement company, or it might be a preschool. There's something that sets it apart. It's not just about how many widgets can we sell, how can we maximize the profit. So it's a very unusual practice. There's 12 of us in the impact team, and that's our main focus, is getting legal structures right and supporting people. The other thing that you alluded to is I'm on the board of Christian Savings. So Christian Savings has about 250 million that's been loaned to it, and we then loan it out to churches and charities for buildings. So that's a different hat. And then the other hat is I do a lot in this governance area. So the Institute of Directors in New Zealand is kind of the preeminent governance body, and I'm a facilitator for them. So I come in and take training about governance and teach people about what governance is and how to stay safe. So yeah, that's a bit of the background on who I am. I also do a podcast called Seeds, where I've talked with 435 inspiring people for an hour long each conversation. So I've done that for 7 years, and it's now a lot of content about why do you do what you do, trying to go a bit deeper. And I host another podcast for the IOD called Board Matters, which is all about governance. So I can send you the links to some of these things.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different topics that I can talk about, but maybe if we just start with governance as an interesting one to begin. So the framing I like to give this is that each of you are probably involved in governance, either more or less, but I want you to imagine that you're watching the television and you're seeing people on the TV, and these people here are running around and they've got one color on. Their clothes are one color, and then another group of people have a different color on, and they're running around, and everybody seems to be trying to kick a ball, and it's bouncing around. And then another person steps in, and they are wearing all black color, and they've got a whistle, and they blow the whistle, and everyone stops, and they look and say, you know, seem to be looking for direction from this person. So what am I talking about here? It's a game, right? It's a game of some kind. And I'll leave you to fill in, is it soccer? Is it rugby? Is it netball? Like, it could be almost any game. But the point of my story is that I could be the best person in the whole entire world at kicking a ball. I could kick it a kilometer and so accurate. But if I'm standing on this side of the line and not on this side of the line, what does that kicking count for? Doesn't count for anything, because I've broken a rule of the game, which is I'm not standing in the field, I'm standing out of the field. So I like to give that as a picture of governance, because actually governance is about understanding what are the rules of the game, where are the lines, and how do I stay safe so that when I'm in a board meeting, I'm actually able to do it in a way that keeps me safe, but also that we as a board together are making good decisions, and we're able to not have a risk of claims being brought against us because we didn't even realize we were stepping outside of the boundary line that was there. So this is relevant for all of us if we want to stay safe. And the distinction that I want to draw is the difference between governance and management. So some of you may have thought about this or wondered about this, and I have a feeling, given the nature of other church groups that I'm involved in, there ends up being a blurring of the lines between governance and management. But just to give you the picture, imagine that there's a wooden sailing ship. So we're going back in time, and you're the captain of the ship. And you're on the ship, you're looking around and you're going, there's a leak over there. Somebody go fix the leak. The sails, they're ripped. We need to fix the rip in the sail. Somebody touch up the paint job there. It needs to be better. That's the management role. The ship is moving forward. We need to make sure that it's being looked after and tended to. So management is the day-to-day operation of the charity or the entity. And a lot of you will be involved in making sure that your day-to-day operating. Governance is not management. Governance is a group of people have gotten into a helicopter. So my imagery isn't quite working here, right? Because it's an old school ship, but the governance has gotten into a helicopter. They've gone high up above. They are 5 kilometers in the air, or really high above the ship. From that distance, can they see that there's a rip in the sail? Can they see that there's a touch up of the paint that's needed? Can they see that there's a little leak that needs plugging? They can't because they're up here. But what can you see from the helicopter? What can you see looking out in front? You can see the iceberg, which is dead ahead. And if the ship continues going the way it's going, it will hit the iceberg. So the helicopter, the governance role is to be at the highest level and to be calling down to the ship, turn now, otherwise you are going to crash into the iceberg that you haven't yet seen. That's the difference between management and governance. And too often, I think we forget that and we get so worried about the little rip in the sail or the touch up of the paint job. We forget the bigger picture that we're here, particularly in church setting, we're here for intergenerational perspectives. And if the governance ends up on your boards, obviously I haven't been to any of your board meetings, but if your board meetings are descending into what type of paper should we buy? Or what's the power bill? Which power provider should we use? Or what type of drink should we get for this event that's coming up? If you're getting into that level of detail, then you're no longer performing the governance function. You're probably getting too much into the weeds and into the management. So I don't know your boards, but my encouragement is make sure you're staying at the high level so that you can be looking strategy. Where are we headed? Not tomorrow, not a month from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now. How about this? 100 years from now? What will our organization look back 100 years from now and say, well done, good and faithful servants? What they did in 2025 set us up for 2125. So it's a really important distinction to make. And it might be at the next board meeting that you're at, you need to remind each other, like, are we on the deck of the ship or are we getting in the helicopter? Because we need to go above. So that's just hopefully a metaphor, a picture that will help you when you're thinking about these things. The other thing that I often see people get wrong in board meetings and in governance is look at your agenda items. How much of your meeting, like it would be interesting, get a stopwatch out at your next governance meeting and start it when you talk about what's happened in the past, what happened last month, what happened last year, and keep a record, roughly, what percentage of your meeting are you spending talking about the past? And then, of course, the challenge is what percentage of your meeting are you spending talking about the future? Where are we headed? The island we need to aim for, or the iceberg we need to avoid. And I think what you'd find, and I do this too, so I'm not, I'm sharing with you the pain of this. If I were honest, I think 75% of my time in board meetings is usually focused on the past. Where are we up to? What's happening? And only 25% is probably focused on the future. Where are we headed? How do we travel? How do we get there? But my challenge is, what would it look like to flip that around and spend 25% of the meeting on the past and 75% of the meeting on the future? Like, I think that would change the dynamics of the focus of governance if we were future focused rather than looking at the past. So I don't know, what would you say in your context? What percentages would you be 50-50, 60-40, 80-20?
I have tried at times to make it more future focused, but it gets quite swamped by present and past stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mostly present, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point to make, is it might be present things, and maybe we could put that within the future focus as well. But the principle is that quite often our boards end up being focused on past things rather than future things. And if your boards are anything like ones that I'm on, you can get bogged down in, it could be the present as well. And how much of your time maybe you need in your agendas to have a line item that says future focus, or, there's a carve out of 20 minutes and we're just going to be brainstorming or blue skies thinking, what if? That would be my encouragement. So hopefully it's helpful to think about that, or the framework within which you operate. So then the other thing I wanted to share is, I'm not going to go through all of these principles, but this is a little guide that I can send you. It's called 7 Principles of Governance for Faith-Based Groups, and it's called a legal guide. And KP, who's the head of the IOD, she's actually a Christian. She gave me a quote and says that this provides a clear framework for faith-based groups to think. But I guess the key thing that I want you all to remember, and of course you're going to say that resonates, is it's more than knowing your duties. It's more than governance. There's bigger considerations when it comes to faith-based groups, because we should be operating from a kingdom mindset, from a intergenerational mindset, rather than what's the numbers on the piece of paper. So I think that God has called us to be good stewards of what we've been given. And that is the essential role of governance, is to be a steward of the resources that you've got. And the higher calling is that your governance should be accountable, not to the state or not to the duties in the Charities Act, but actually thinking higher to God, So it's hopefully something that you do, but how do you implement that so that those bigger considerations get fed in as well? And that could involve things like, who do you collaborate with? Who do you seek out partnerships with? Instead of trying to say it's our thing, it's only us that are working, I'd like to think that we could have a bigger conception of God is moving in different places. And actually, we've got a new initiative. What if we partnered with this other Christian group and we did it together? Sometimes we can get a bit territorial about this is my thing or this is our thing. But if you have a truly bigger picture, like a God perspective, I think that frees us up to seek out collaboration and looking for opportunities to work with others. So I'll send it around. It's just we put a lot of resources on our website. So this is one of them. It's just a free download.
I've got some copies of it.
Oh, you've printed some? Okay, great.
We can get them, send them out to people.
Yeah. And that reminds me, one of the things, this is a little side topic, but I find it helpful to mention, is how many of us talk about the not-for-profit that we're involved in, the not-for-profit sector. So this is a little mission that I've been on, is to change the terminology that we use. So think about not-for-profit, and you're probably quite comfortable with I understand what that is. But actually, not-for-profit is a negative word to describe a whole sector, which is a very positive sector. And what is it in relation to? It's in relation to profit, as if profit was the aim, like you're not for profit. So I'm trying to get people to think about a different conception, which is for purpose. So I operate in the for purpose sector rather than the not for profit, which in my mind has some negative connotations. So in this paper, there's a section about not-for-profit and for-purpose. Seems to be catching on. I've noticed more and more people. Actually, the IOD, they had a seminar at their big leadership event. There's 700 people attended it, and their topic was governance in the for-purpose sector. So they'd adopted it, a little win if you can get a big organization like that doing that. And then the other resource, which I'll send a link to, this is called a governance masterclass for churches. And it's meant to be for leaders of churches. So we make an assumption, not just in church world, but just generally. Oh, Jane, welcome to the board. It's so good to have you here. Okay, agenda item number 1. You know, like we assume somehow that Jane, by joining the board, has downloaded everything there is to know about governance. But governance is something that you learn. It's a skill that you develop. So this paper here is, I call it the governance masterclass for churches. It would apply to any group, to be honest, but I wrote it with churches in mind. And so it has part 1, before you join a board, sets out a scenario and then asks 3 questions. And then the next page has the answers to the questions. And then part 2, a well-run meeting, sets out a not well-run meeting, what could be better? And then part 3, talking about governance and management. Part 4, the culture of a board. So I hope that this will be another helpful resource. I realize it could be overwhelming, the amount of content, but if you work your way through, you know, just one thing a week, then there'd be plenty. But a lot of churches I know that have, deacons or vestries or whatever you call them, they go through this together and do one of the scenarios at the start of the meeting, and it helps to upskill everybody about governance. So it might be something for your churches that could be rolled out, and actually this would be a helpful tool so that everyone understands and starts to get a picture of what is governance. So that's that. Yeah. So those are just some principles about governance that I wanted to mention. The course I do for the IOD, it's literally 4 hours about governance. So I can talk more if you'd like, but I thought maybe I could talk about impact investing next.
Sure.
Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. So impact investing, this is really close to my heart, and it's because I'm involved in it practically myself as well. So impact investing is basically saying, and I'll send you a link to this paper as well. This is a legal opinion on enabling impact investing. So I want you to imagine we all grow up with certain paradigms of thinking, and all of us probably have the paradigm of thinking that I'm about to describe. And that's because we're like goldfish in the goldfish bowl. We're swimming around. We don't know that there's something called air because we're goldfish. We're in the bowl. And actually, we need someone to show us that there's different ways of thinking about things. So impact investing would say, so the traditional way of thinking about a church, a charity, a fund would be this charity is set up to advance education for preschoolers. Just say that. It's endowed with $10 million, just using round numbers for the sake of it. Could be $100 million, could be $1 million. The trustees would then say, well, we've got $10 million. What are we going to do with that $10 million? I know. Let's invest it because we got to keep it safe. Let's put it into the BNZ, term deposit. We'll put some in ASB. There's a bond over here. We'll get safe and secure returns from our well-protected $10 million. That's our duty as trustees, is to look after the money, the putia. It's over here. It's kept in a really good place. Or maybe it's put with JB Ware or some fund managers. They go and they put it somewhere. The key is that we get financial return. And then what we do with the financial return, well, that's where we get to exercise some creativity as trustees. Let's say of that 10 million, we got $100,000 back. And therefore, we are using that $100,000 to give 10,000 to this preschool. And we're going to sponsor a scholarship for 5 people to do some study, and we're gonna, fill in the blank. We take the interest or the profits that come from how it's been invested, and we use it to do good. Nothing wrong with that, but I think that's the traditional conception. So I want to open your eyes to another conception, another way of thinking about this. And that way is simple. the trustees look at the 10 million and they say, why were we endowed with the 10 million originally? Well, it was to advance education for preschoolers. So instead of thinking, let's put the 10 million into secure bank deposits, what would it look like if we took a portion of it, let's say 10%, $1 million, 9 million, put it into bank deposits, keep it safe and secure. But we take 1 million and we invest it for impact. So we actually put it into a business, or we actually invest it in a more active way, potentially into social housing, or potentially into an IT company that's creating an app for preschool children to learn to read. So you take the money, and the way that you invest it is done through the filter of the purpose of why you were originally entrusted with the funds. So it all of a sudden opens your eyes up to a different way of thinking. I think it's a lazy way for trustees to say, well, we have a fund manager, they invest it somewhere. We just know that we get returns, and then what we do with the returns, that's how we have impact. So this is a new conception, which is actually we have a responsibility to think about the 10 million and how we invest it and where we invest it, because that potentially has even more impact than the 100,000 that we give out each year. So I'm not saying you take the full 10 million and you put it into a startup, but I'm saying you start small. Maybe you start with 1%. You take 100,000 of the 10 million and you try working, and here's the key, collaborating with others in the sector. So it's not just you going out on your own. You've probably all heard of the Tyndall Foundation. They're really, really good at coming alongside charities or for-purpose organizations. And they'll say, look, we understand that you need $500,000 to start this new initiative for mental health for teenagers, or, you fill in the blank. It's an amazing thing. It's going to be successful. We believe in it, but we're not giving you the 500,000. We're giving you 50,000, and we're letting you use our name so you can go out and get money from others, because having Tyndall supporting you is like the catalyst that other funders might join as well. So this is my encouragement, is when you're coming to think about your investments, what would it look like to take 1% of them, or a percentage, not the whole thing, and think more proactively about your community, your local scene, and also are there initiatives which are coming out of the churches that you're here to support, where some, maybe they want to set up a preschool, but they can't get the funding to do it. What would it look like if you came in and said, here's some seed funding, here's a $50,000 loan. We want it to be paid back. We're not giving it to you. This is a financial investment, either loaning it, which is called debt, or buying shares in a company, which is equity. So we actually own a percentage. We get a portion of the profit back. But hopefully you can see the mindset shift that this involves. So I'm going to make it really practical with two examples. The first one is Save the Children. So that's a very well-known charity. And in Australia, Save the Children have set up an impact investing fund. That's the phrase, by the way, impact investing. So that fund, they've raised 15 million Australian dollars from a wide variety of charities, each of them putting in 50,000 or 100,000, or, fill in the blank of the amount. But they've got a coalition of the willing putting in the 15 million. Now, remember, this is Save the Children. What do you think they're investing the 15 million into?
Saving the children.
Yeah, saving the children. But here's the key bit, which makes it so interesting. They're investing the 15 million into startups that have to do with children. So this startup is doing a desalination pump, and it's going to go to Africa, and it's going to allow children to get clean water. This startup is preparing a computer program which will teach refugee children English. This startup is, so you get the point. All the investment, if it's successful, is not only going to give financial return, which it should, because they do the due diligence, but it's also potentially, if it's successful, if you help set up a company which is now providing 1,000 freshwater pumps in Africa, you're helping thousands and thousands of children, which is your original remit, which is we want to save the children. So it's just a really interesting example that I know the people who founded this, so I know that it's working. One of their funds is focused on South Pacific. So they're raising money to invest in companies that support South Pacific initiatives that help the children. So you can see it's a different mindset to a traditional Oliver Twist, please, sir, can I have some more? And that's the mentality that many of us have grown up with. I grew up with it as well. The church is there to collect Sunday donations, and that's it. And this mindset is actually, we could go out and we could do something more proactively. Here's another challenge. I guarantee you, in your congregations, in the churches, you have wealthy people. I guarantee it. And those wealthy people have never had their minds open to the fact that they could invest in a way that was actually advancing the kingdom values. So what would it look like for you as a diocese, as an example, to come up with something like a fund or some way that your wealthier members could come and say, I'm not only giving you, here's the key, we still want you to give us money on a Sunday, we don't want you to stop donations, but if I came to you, wealthy person who just sold your IT business for $20 million, and I could come to you with a proposition about an aged care facility that we want to build right here. It will serve our local community, but it's going to cost us $15 million to build it, or probably more, right? What would it look like if you offered people an opportunity to participate in the advancing of the gospel through the use of their money? And so the point is, you don't have to fund the whole thing. You can actually go out and get others to help you to invest. The church I go to just finished building an $8 million facility in Rolliston. So it's a Presbyterian church. And they went to the bank, they went to the presbytery, which is, had some money. They got lots of money from sausage sizzles and, the $2 here, the $5 there, but they were still short. So what we did there is we went out to the congregation. It's called Hope Presbyterian, and there's lots of people there. And they said, would any of you be willing to loan us money? We will pay it back. But would you be willing to loan it to us at 0% interest rate? So that's another form of impact investing, where the church was able to be built because some wealthy members came alongside it and said, I'll loan you $300,000 at 0% interest rate, which is a lot better than the bank offering, and allowed that facility to be built. So I'm giving you lots of examples here because I'm hoping some of them will resonate and you might go, that's a different way of thinking. And I'll open up to questions maybe, and we can have a little discussion. But the final one I'll give you is community finance. So community finance is an impact company. I'm the chair of it, so I've seen it right from the beginning. And what we do is come alongside community housing providers. It's a hard road for a community housing provider to walk into the Bank of New Zealand and say, can we borrow $10 million? Oh, well, what's your business model? Well, we're helping people to stop living on the street and in their cars. We want to get them into housing. It's not for, profit isn't the primary objective. So what we do is we've been able to tap into KiwiSaver funders like Simplicity and Generate and Pathfinder. They're all KiwiSaver funds. Simplicity has $8 billion under management now. So they've got quite a lot. And they've come alongside projects that we brought them. So one in Christchurch was a $15 million, 40 houses being built for poor people, for rent to buy, and selling some of them to make some money to subsidize it all. So it's called a mixed tenure development. So it's not just people who didn't have housing, emergency housing. It's a variety of housing. Anyway, that money came from the impact investors. So they put money into community finance, and then we loaned it to the community housing providers. The key here is that it's actual houses that have been built. There's actual assets. There's actual rent and subsidies from government. So the money can flow back. So the impact investor gets their return. In that case, it's slightly lower than they would get in the bank, but they also know that there's now 100 people living in housing that would not be living in housing if they hadn't done it. So it's asking investors to have a bigger conception. Financial return, yes. Impact, yes. So that's what impact investing is all about. How can you actually leverage the capital that you've got already and invest it for impact in new initiatives? And it would be, I actually think it would be really interesting to go out into your communities and into your churches and find out about people who have really good ideas, but capital is what's holding them back. What would it look like if we invested into the people who actually have a really good idea, but can't get money to do it, that aligns with the church itself? So Oxford Terrace Baptist Church in Christchurch, if you ever visit it, they got a big payout from the insurance from the earthquakes. And if you go to visit, you'll see that their facility now hosts conferences all the time. It's a church, but it's beautiful, like it could be a secular event that's held there as well. And then they have a cafe. Cafes actually don't make much money, so be very careful. But having said that, people do come and have coffee. They come into a church that they maybe never would have otherwise. They breaking bread together is a thing. So they have a cafe which is running. In the second story of that church, they've got office space, and they're leasing it out to World Vision and other Christian charities. So they're getting rental income. And then next door, they had a car park. So they've made the car park into 20 social housing units. So now they're reaching the community through providing social housing right next door to the church. So it's an example of, and that's a sustainable income stream as well. So the impact plus the income, it's a good thing. You have to be careful. Don't just go set up social housing next to the church and assume everyone in the social housing is going to come to your church, because that's a line you have to be very careful about, is that they have their lives to live. It's not meant to be like, well, now you're coming to church. So I think they struggled with that, honestly, a little bit, because I think they assumed that by providing social housing, everyone will now join our church. But there is a line there, which you can guess. But if you're curious about this at all, this legal opinion is about how I think, back to how I started, I think trustees and those in charge of money, because of changes to the Trusts Act 2019, in the old days, I understand, but we have to keep it safe. We have fiduciary duties. We can't touch that because that was set aside 80 years ago. But I think the Trusts Act now has reshaped things, and you should think about the purpose for which the money was endowed when you come to decide where it's invested. And that could include a little bit towards an impact investing project. Dip your toes in. If it doesn't work, pull back. But if it does work, why not put in 7%? Why not increase it more? If we want our church to be growing and dynamic in the future and not in a continual decline, I think we have to look at green shoot ideas. And we can't just sit waiting for the last 85-year-old to not be there anymore. You know what I mean? Like, we, as a church, we do actually have some things. We have property, we have sometimes assets. How do we use them in a way that actually advances the kingdom? That's my challenge around this whole topic. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions or thoughts about this? Because you can tell I do a lot in this area and I'm happy to hear any feedback.
Anything from anyone out there? I'm thinking Anglican Family Care slightly different to where you're coming from, but maybe it resonates to the way of targeting people to invest in what you do. Because I know that for a lot of organisations, the whole funding landscape is really difficult, especially when you're dealing with government contracts and other things that there's been a lot of pressure on.
Yeah.
And I know some of our social service organisations have had considerable grief over that the last year.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Well, I know that there are wealthy people here, and I know that if you explained things in a way that they could understand, they might very well get involved. One of my clients is based here, and I know if you walked in the room right now, you would say, really, that's a wealthy person? Because they're dressed very humbly. They drive an old car, but I know that they have millions and millions of dollars. And there will be people in your churches that are like that, that if you could present an opportunity to partner and be involved. Of course, the danger here, there are lines to be drawn. You don't want to do this in a preying on the vulnerable way, or in a go remortgage your house so you can invest it in our church way. So I'm not advocating that at all, but I am telling you, I'm confident that there will be people who could be they just got left money in a will, or could be they've sold their business, or yeah. And it doesn't even have to be millionaires. It could be somebody who has 700,000 or something, like they've done really well in their life. What would it look like to have them put 1% into a project? Yeah.
Any questions from anyone there, or comments or requests for a bit, tell us about whatever topic?
I've got a couple of things. Stephen, thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate that. As you know, I'm based here in Wanaka, and one is, I suppose, a story along the lines of what you said, and that between the church in Wanaka, an older church, and the vicarage, an empty block of land, probably of a value of $3 or $4 million. And in the last 5-6 years, it's now got a community hub on it. And it's been an incredible success story. We had to navigate our way through some relatively challenging times because some thought it wasn't the wisest of uses of that particular land.
Yeah.
But what an incredible asset it is, both for the wider community and for us. I think it's an example of some of the things that you were saying in a very practical way. And they were short of some money at a particular point, and they did exactly what you're saying, is that they went out to people, and people did make loans to enable the project to be completed at either zero or very, very generous interest rate for the project itself. So I suppose just to say, it is happening in this diocese, and that's just one really good example. And the other one, and I'm just wondering if others probably have a better idea than I do, but at the moment there's the exploration, and tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, Andrew or Anne, but the whole Rakiura project, which is the sale of an aged care facility in Southland, and consideration being given to invest some of the proceeds from that in a housing development on Stewart Island. And I think probably one of the questions for the diocesan council, but also the trust board, is how do we ensure that those funds, if they are to be invested in this project, are protected in some way? And one of the things I heard you talk about is the possibility of having some equity in the project by using funds in that particular way. So I don't know, some others in the group online may have some other comments about that. I'm not too sure what's appropriate to share, but there may be some things in that space that Stephen could give us some assistance with.
Yeah, and it was discussed at the trust board, and I think they were interested in looking at maybe interest-free loans sort of space.
Yeah.
So it's something that we need to get checked out and get some advice on.
Yeah.
And I've had a bit of pressure saying, what's the answer? But I haven't been able to get onto it in terms of putting a briefing out or getting some feedback back. But it kind of feels as if it's going down that direction.
Yeah.
But certainly for our trust board, the DDTB, there's been a lot of talk over the year about, well, it's not it's not our money, we invest on behalf of others and so on. But I actually really like the idea of saying, well, actually, what if there was a particular thing that we could say, invest in this, and we can actually use it to help with some seed funding for some things that are going on.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth thinking about.
Yeah, I see in Christchurch, because of the cathedral rebuild and all that stuff, there was a wealthy business person from Auckland who felt an affinity with the rebuild and basically gave $1 million. And that $1 million has now been given out, and where we were giving. So this is a little bit different, but these were grants to green shoot initiatives within the Christian church, and they were all to do with discipleship. So how can we bring more people into the church? It's just, as you're talking, it's just an interesting model that I hadn't touched on before. But what would it look like to look around the diocese and look for the green shoots, particularly if there is some sort of a business element or some income base? What would it look like for you to come alongside and invest so that not only does that project succeed, but you get financial return and sustainable income, which would be really interesting. The Waiapu diocese up in Hawke's Bay, they sold their retirement villages. I think they got quite a lot of money, and they've been very proactive about how they're using it. So if you haven't talked to them yet, that might be worth a conversation, because I know that they're very active in social housing project here and other things that.
As is the Diocese of Wellington as well.
Yeah. But the other bit there that you mentioned, Damon, that piece of land that was basically unused, but was worth 3 or 4 million, like that might be an interesting exercise as well. I don't know who would do this, but what property is owned out there, and how much is it worth? And is it timely to think about repurposing some of it and selling some of it to free up some money to be able to be a bit more proactive? Because it's kind of an overused phrase, but are we mowing the lawns for Jesus? Is there this green bit of grass here that gets parked on once a year at Christmas because we need the extra space, but basically isn't used for at all? Maybe people run around on a Sunday morning or something, but what would it look like to be objective about it and say, well, actually, we could subdivide it, we could sell that, and with that 3 million we get, we could then put towards something else.
We've got, this is Andrew speaking here, we've got one parish who have been beavering away at various things in the Caversham area, and they now have getting to the stage with their property has one smaller residential unit which they've refurbished, which will be going out for rent soon. They've actually got 2 tiny homes and putting them together,
right,
to provide a more modern and better clergy housing option for the future,
right,
but also able to be rented out if it's not used for that. And the vicarage, which was a huge barn of a place, they have brought up to healthy home standards and are now have a rental agreement with former refugees, a large Syrian family.
right.
So it means in the end, the property has got at least 2 or 3 forms of rental income coming in,
Yep,
that actually make a difference in terms of their mission as a parish and what they can achieve.
Yeah.
So I guess it's one example, not necessarily bowling or selling the whole lot, but actually how can you use a particular land asset you've got in a more effective way.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily endorse what I'm about to tell you, but when I moved to Wellington, I was staying in a Christian hostel, and the Christian hostel was owned by a church. And so that church had the foresight to have built this facility. It was actually sitting on top of a car park. So they got the rental income from the people who would park their cars there. And then on the top, there was 5 flats. Each one had, I think, 5 or 6 people, students. So the young people in a Christian flat, every week there was devotions and Bible studies, and obviously you were encouraged to go to the church, which was right across the road. So they got income streams, and they supported young people in their first year from home moving to a new city. So, there's a lot of people who move to Dunedin who probably are looking for somewhere to stay. That's another example of, this is the thing, once you have this mindset, you'll start seeing potential opportunities all over the place. The other thing for parishes, this is a hard conversation, but some parishes will have 4 people left in them, and the average age will be 87. And, it's a really hard conversation, but what does the future hold for that particular parish or that particular place? There's an example in Christchurch where I can't remember which one it was, but one of the churches basically shut down and sold the property, and then it went towards a new initiative because the 87-year-olds realized that this would be a better use of the facility and the property, which I think is an amazing vision, that they could recognize that maybe this particular initiative has had its time and we need to draw a line on it and, move forward in a different way. It's a really hard conversation, of course, because this person's great-grandmother was baptized in the building, or, it's way deeper than I'm making it sound, but you get the point, is that there will be some assets or facilities that are coming to the end of their life. What would it look for you as proactive governance, mindful of 100 years from now, to think about how do we use what we've got in a really good way? Iwi groups are really good at this, actually. If you look at Naitahu and some of the big settlements, they got I think like $100 million 20 years ago. Now they're a multi-billion-dollar operation. I'm not suggesting that you do that, but they were prudent with where they put their money and how they invested it. In their case, they've gone into tourism and, farming and fisheries and other things. But I just feel like my job today is to challenge you all a little bit so that you lift your eyes up and think about what would the options look like here.
Stephen, just a couple of other comments too. I mean, I really like the way you describe for purpose, and I think that is vitally important for where we are as a diocese now. We need to actually determine what our purpose is, and because sometimes it feels like we're just surviving. That's our purpose, is to survive. How do we beyond that mindset? And that means, from my perspective at least, beginning to prioritize where our focus is and being willing to let go of some things. And sometimes I feel that we're trying to do too much, and all we're doing is just, just treading water. I think two cautions for me. One is the church hasn't always proven itself to be good stewards of its resources. And I think that's probably certainly true of this diocese over decades, and I mean decades. Hopefully we've got a lot better at it. And so it's about we have to show that we can be trusted. So if anyone's willing to invest in new initiatives that this church deems as appropriate, we need to prove our trustworthiness. And I think there's a lot of work still to be done in that space. And the other thing for me, it's just about our capacity. It's great to think of all these new initiatives and projects, but when you don't have the people who are able to step up and to provide oversight or governance, they're going to fall over. And so again, I suppose that comes back to for purpose. What's our purpose? What's our priority? And therefore begin to channel our resources, our energies, our capacities in that space.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I endorse that 100%. But if you did say, we want to pursue this, we want to explore it, what would it look like to free up a salary, an FTE, to hire someone who is really good at this.
We'd love to do that.
Well, but does this come back to priorities and where do budgets go and things? Because if you
Don't have any fat.
you don't have anything,
Any fat.
yeah. So the assets that you've got, like funds and money. So I'm just here to challenge you a little bit. If you really want to not have the problem that you're mentioning, Damon, you might need to bring in someone who actually knows the stuff and can do it. In my experience, charities often will play around the edges with this type of thing, and it's frustrating because nobody really understands it or gets into it. But the charities that are successful actually prioritize it, and they hire someone who knows their stuff, can come in and help to lead the way. Yeah, it's like I've helped some charities set up, and it's all volunteers. There's no fat, there's nothing like that. And it peters along, and it's, it has the name and people know what it is, but nothing much happens. The moment they take the initiative and hire someone to be half-time or full-time to promote the trust or the charity, all of a sudden there's events that happen and there's initiatives that start, but it takes a bit of faith to do that, to free up some of the assets to say, we don't want to be a dying diocese. We want to be a vibrant and growing diocese. What would that look like? And maybe it is somebody has to look at the property portfolio, and you just have to sell a piece of land that's worth 500,000 or probably $1 million.
Unless you sell Monica, what do you mean?
Sorry, there's something wrong with my Zoom connection.
We really need to repurpose some of our assets for a purpose.
Yeah, that's
for that
exactly
purpose. So we need to repurpose unused assets for a purpose.
Yeah.
Where we get stuck is that assets are associated with particular faith communities.
Yeah.
They're held on trust for them. And as long as they're alive and kicking in any way, that can be the difficult thing to influence or to get a change.
Well, you should talk with Alex Summerly, who's right now with the Canterbury, Christchurch Diocese, going through an exercise of reviewing all of the trusts and asking, can we repurpose what's in these trusts? Because some of them were set up in 1942, and the purpose was to help middle school boys learn to swim, or something that's no longer actually relevant today. And so you end up, it becomes a burden because you've got to administer all these things which are not going to be advancing the kingdom today. So you should talk to him, because they're preparing, essentially they're going to have to go to Parliament with a private member's bill, and they're going to repurpose a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, we have done a bit of work on that, and it probably needs a bit more work. And I think the Christchurch Diocese is quite unique in New Zealand, the way it's set up legally.
Yeah.
The rest of us, we can go, there's various routes we can go through, and we've done that through our own synod and so on in terms of changing some trust things, but it does take a bit. Anyway, that's a good.
Yeah.
Is there anything else from anyone? I'm thinking about Diana and Lynette, who's gone offline briefly. Diana, is there anything you want to ask that would be of use to Anglican Family Care?
It is all completely fascinating. And I guess I think you're right, Stephen. I think we all get stuck in a rut. We all do the same thing, and I know that because we've just been looking at our money and what we do with it. We do have a person that we pay that is out there doing that marketing piece for us. And it certainly does make an enormous difference in terms of getting into the community, those people through the church that support us, all of those things. We can vouch for that. And the events, organising events, getting people to events, it's remarkable. She's really good at it too, but we can absolutely vouch for that.
Yeah. I mean, what I would love to see actually is that the church is leading the way in ways that people traditionally wouldn't have thought was possible. So just to give you a brief example, like what would it take for the Anglican diocese to run a 6-week course about setting up a business? I know this is challenging, right? It's not a religious advancing thing, but essentially that's called an incubator. And what it means is that you gather people together who have great business ideas and you teach them about how do you set up a business? How do you run it? How do you operate it? It's done all over the country. Down here, I think there's something called Startup Dunedin, or yeah. So they do this type of thing. But what would it look like if the church ran it? I'm not saying that you should do this. I'm just giving you ideas, because the point is at the end of that 6-week program, and maybe you make it open to people who attend your churches, like to start with, we're going to run something. And then at the end of it, you realize that there's 4 new initiatives that if you were to sponsor them, if you were to fund them, they might lead to multi-million-dollar businesses that you could own a percentage of. So that to me is kind of exciting. I know it's challenging to think in that way, but it's showing leadership in a segment that traditionally a church would not be involved in, but actually it's a way to give back as well. So yeah, it's all about thinking a little bit outside of the box. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I guarantee you some of your documents will be out of date. So I see this all the time, trustees and policies and things like that. So that's something that might be a separate topic, but I wanted to mention this is the Charities Health Check. So the Charities Health Check basically goes through people, policies, assets, and then a specific one on faith groups. And it asks a bunch of questions for a charity as to how do we operate. You have to rate yourself out of 10 for each of the questions. So I'll give you some copies of that. But that would be an exercise worth doing, because quite often when you're looking at documents, you'll realize, oh, this was drafted in 1971 or 1987 or even 2014. It's not up to date, bespoke for 2025. So yeah.
The trust board here has been renewing its and relooking at all its rules.
Yeah.
And the first cab off the rank was SIPO.
Oh, great.
But,
and did you put in impact investing?
it was mentioned in it, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's the start, but it's there, yeah.
Yeah. This paper that I'm going to give you a copy of, the legal guide, I put in some example wording from other SIPOs, including from Tyndall. And I've got this as well. This is called a RESPO. SIPO is Statement of Investment Performance Objectives. So this is something I can give as well, which talks about, I call them hybrid structures for impact. So it's, you might have seen this. I gave it out at the Christian Savings Conference as well. Yeah. Well, that's good. Legal documents shouldn't be set in stone. It's not like the 10 Commandments. They should be updated and they should be relevant for today rather than just in the back. And this is from the Royal Commission report. So this was on the abuse and care. So that's a guide that we've done on that topic as well.
Is there any other final questions before? I don't think people need to get away soon anyway.
Yeah. I'll just mention 2 other quick things. I'm not sure if you've seen that. This is the Faith in Action report. So I can send you a copy. This came out in August last year. We helped to fund it, and it looks into the state of Christian charities in New Zealand and goes sector by sector, looking at different ways that the church, like what's the average church look like, for example. So that might be a copy for you, but it's an online PDF as well. So happy to share that. And then this, I think have you sent that around yet? This is the charities and tax paper. So
yeah, I think we attached it to the article.
Yeah, great.
Advertising.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We'll we will send some of the things that you sent out to us, anything else.
Yeah.
People have been.
So it's mainly, Lynette was there on Monday when I held a seminar for a whole bunch of people. There was 3 of us talking about. We gave this, which is an additional paper to this one. So this goes through the 15 questions from the IRD and analyzes each of them and gives thoughts and comments. So that people tell us it's very helpful to give the framing. Essentially, just so you know, my problem with this review that the IRD is doing, which we talk about here, is that it opens the door to let's tax charities, and it adopts what I call a reverse Robin Hood model, which is we'll steal from the poor to give to the rich. So it's, I think, by opening the door and saying charities are actually taking advantage of the system, there's a loophole where we need to stop the loophole so that we can tax charities and their business income. It's a mindset which is incorrect, because actually what we're doing by allowing charities to have tax exemption is that they can use the money to advance the charitable purposes. And it's like a disconnect in the IRD's framing of it. It was actually, we should be empowering charities. And one way we do that is by having donation receipts and tax benefits. So that's why I think we should all submit about the proposal. It's open till the 31st of March. And if they don't hear from people, then they'll probably just change it. But conceptually, I think this eventually in 10 years may lead to churches shouldn't have tax exemption as well. So by opening the door today, it's not just that that's open, it's that in the future it might be widened. For example, why is it just unrelated business income that would be taxed? What about passive business? What about passive income where we put it in a bank and we get interest? Why don't we tax that as well? So as soon as you open the door, it's like I can see the potential of what it would lead to. Yeah. Great. Well, it's great to meet you all, and I'll send links. So you might enjoy the podcast I do. Like I said, there's 435 conversations. If you're driving anyway, you might as well download. I just spoke with Tatipini O'Regan about treaty settlements and had 2 hours of his life story. So that was amazing. He was like Kiwi Bank New Zealander of the Year. And it's a real variety of content. And if we can be of assistance, hopefully you get a sense of who I am and what we're about. As a law firm, we're trying to empower the church. And we can be another option for you to think about if you come across we have a legal question or something. You already have great lawyers, but it's good to know that there's options for different specialties or different ways of thinking. And I think we get asked by the Law Society to teach other lawyers about this type of topic. So I think we're quite unique in our approach and the way that we're doing it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming on board.
Thank you.
All right then, bye-bye.
Cool.
Good.